Hi, I'm Michelle Malkin. I'm so sorry I couldn't be with you, but I want to thank the 912 Project of Idaho and Idahoans for Local Education for holding this extremely important forum on the perils of Common Core. And I'd also like to thank the organizers for inviting me to spend just a few minutes speaking with you on why this issue is so important and why each and every one of you in this room needs to get involved somehow, in small ways or large, in defeating Common Core in your own backyard and across the country. As many of you know who've followed my work over the last 20 years, education has always been one of my top priorities. It's not just a theoretical or abstract thing for me. It's not just a bunch of TV talking points. This is personal. My mom was a public school teacher for 30 years in South Jersey. My father was a neonatologist who had the privilege of studying at one of the finest institutions of higher learning in the U.S. He went to Johns Hopkins Medical School. So from the time that I was old enough to understand and to comprehend, my parents always reinforced the importance of a good education. Like so many of your families, in my family, education was the ticket to success. And my parents made sure that our education included not only academic excellence and intellectual discipline, but also a good moral education and a good civic education. Our founding fathers knew, as so many of you understand now, that a solid civic education is critical to the survival of our country. An appreciation for the principles of our government, the limitations of our government, and our responsibility as informed citizens. Well, over the last several years, several decades, of course, those foundations have been undermined by forces of progressivism and extreme multiculturalism, collectivism, anti-Americanism, and constructivism. I've exposed many of them in my columns, but it's really my own personal experience combating those forces in dealing with my own children's education. I have a 13-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son, and when my daughter was in second grade, we had a revelatory experience with these so-called education reformers. My daughter kept coming home with the same homework sheets for math every single day. And there was something rather disturbing about these math worksheets. Namely, they weren't teaching math. They were arts and crafts projects. My daughter was being taught to color in numbers, but not to add or subtract or multiply them. And when we started asking questions, of course we were met with a wall of resistance and arrogance. And any of you who've raised your voices in your school systems know exactly what I'm talking about. It is not easy to be a whistleblower, to be a squeaky wheel, and to go up against the conventional wisdom. But we did our homework, and that's the key here when we approach and we deal with and we fight these battles. Don't take my word for anything about Common Core or any other single person's word. Do your own homework, come to your own conclusions, and then take action. Well, in our case, we found out that my daughter was being exposed to a curriculum called Everyday Math, which of course was anything but math. And we learned that there were parents and responsible teachers across the country who were raising their voices against this. In some cases, at the middle school level, kids were actually told these questions to answer in their workbooks. If math were a color, what color would it be? If math were a food, what food would it be? And if math were weather, what weather would it be? Well, I am not a professional mathematician or meteorologist, but I knew these people were all wet. And there is a common theme among all of these educational fads that you will confront. and is certainly something that many of the Common Core people cite. And what they'll do to defend their undermining of academic rigor is explain that children need to get away from so-called drill and kill. We can't be boring them with memorizing multiplication tables because they need critical thinking skills. And of course, the rational response to this is, how can they think critically about anything if there's nothing in their heads? The genius, the devilish ingeniousness of schemes like Common Core and its predecessors, whether we're talking about outcome-based education or Goals 2000 or the National School to Work movement or Race to the Top and Common Core, is their ability to co-opt language that appears very reasonable. Who could disagree with Common Core? Of course we all have to have a common core of knowledge. But if you look closely and you scrutinize the actual guidelines and the material on the Common Core page and what they've cooked up, it doesn't match the rhetoric. There are several lies that are being told, fundamental lies that are being told about how this thing came into being and what it is going to produce, that I ask you to be aware of. First is the idea that somehow this was state-led and grassroots supported. It couldn't be further from the truth. And the fact that the biggest promoters, cheerleaders, and defenders of Common Core are federal educrats tells you all you need to know. It's Arne Duncan and it's the education establishment which have largely peddled and defended this scheme. There is an elite cadre in the National Governors Association and the Association of the State Chief Schools Officers that collaborated and colluded behind closed doors with an elite group of big business outfits that will benefit most from this multi-billion-dollar boondoggle. You'll be familiar with all of their names. I urge you to start with places like the Pioneer Institute and Freedom Works, and of course your local groups which will have great resources from other parents who have fought these battles. Another lie I think that needs to be debunked and debunked vigilantly is the idea that this set of so-called standards will raise academic performance in the United States. The fact, of course, is that these standards have been largely untested and are experimental and use your children as educational and pedagogical guinea pigs. Many of you have already become familiar with some of the outrages with the English and math standards. The idea that literature is being supplanted by informational text, that your kids will be reading executive orders and articles from liberal magazines like the New Yorker and the Atlantic instead of the classics. In math education, of course, the reality that children will be slowed in their progress towards learning algebra rather than accelerated. And another lie or myth that needs to be explored and exposed is the idea that if you're a parent who homeschools or has children in private or religious schools, that somehow you'll be protected from this scheme. Again, nothing could be further than the truth, because the fact is that the collaborators and architects behind Common Core, who've been hard at work for many, many, many decades, long before Obama was even a community organizer in Chicago, have been working for a long time to radicalize and upend the entire American educational system. So the same people that are behind foisting these Common Core standards in every state and across the country in order to have control and to monopolize the entire textbook market and the testing market are also implanted in places like the College Board and are working to align their testing vehicles to these standards. We need every voice and everybody we can get to raise their voices against this scheme. And there's so many different roles that you could play. We need amplifiers in social media. The presence of Common Core critics and opponents now has really come to bear on Twitter and on Facebook, sounding the alarm, leaving comments in educational magazines and websites that have otherwise been able to control the narrative on these education issues. We need investigators. We need people who can print brochures. We need diplomats, people who can reach out to non-traditional constituencies and understand that this is one of the issues where you can reach across the aisle. There are many teachers, union members, independents who know that there's something rotten at the core of Common Core, and there is strength in numbers. You hear this common canard, and I invoke it often from the left, that they do things for the children. Well, I am asking every able-bodied person out there to do something to stop Common Core for your children. I thank you for taking the time to be at this forum, and I urge you to do as much research as possible, join forces, and do what we can to bring common sense and also a sense of constitutional commitment back to the area of education. It is absolutely right that it is in the purview of local control and parental control first. Thank you and God bless.